Hello and welcome to the third part of Dr. Anne Baring's webinar, The Path to Union with the Divine Ground, the Essential Teaching of Four Spiritual Traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Daoism, and Christianity. Today we will hear from Anne on Daoism.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third talk in this series. I'd like to thank Emeritus Professor Chris Beisch once again for his help with these webinars, particularly with the historical background, which was tremendous help to me. And I'm going to start with the political or the sort of historical background before I actually come to Taoism itself. Now, it's not working again, so something's gone wrong. I'm going to stop and start again because I think I pressed the wrong thing. So difficult to get this right. So I thought I'd start with this map of China, which includes Wuhan. So now we know where everything is and where it all started. And in the next one, I would just want to show you, first of all, look at the size of China, how huge it is, and look at how tiny the countries beneath it are. And here I thought I'd show you just a map of the Yangtze River, how absolutely huge it is, how long, stretching right across into Tibet, or rather from Tibet right across to the coast. And here, I thought, Chinese civilization is at least 4,000 years old. It grew out of shamanic practices that were far older, dating far back into the Neolithic. Over many centuries, China has been traumatized by terrible wars in which millions of people died. The life of the individual counted for nothing in relation to the life of the clan or the tribal group. Only very recently has China emerged from this archaic pattern of war and violence. The invasion and annexation of Tibet in 1950 was a tragic part of this pattern, but out of it has come the diffusion of Buddhism in the West. So I'm just going to run through the revolutionary movements in modern China. So from 1949 to 1950, we had the Communist Revolution. From 1962 to 76, there was the Cultural Revolution, which really wiped out all the old habits, the old ideas and beliefs, the old customs, and the old culture. It was total revolution. 45 million people died of starvation or persecution or executions. Most of you on this call are too young to remember this, but I remember it very well. And I would recommend those books down at the bottom if you want to read about this period, particularly Yung Chang, Wild Swans, an absolutely marvelous book. China's meteoric rise since 1978, after the disastrous rule of Mao Zedong, is one of the most striking examples of the impact of opening an economy to global markets. Millions of people have been lifted out of abject poverty and illiteracy, although they are still controlled by the powerful communist regime, which exercises minute surveillance of the population, including eye recognition. Since 1979, China has undergone a shift from a largely agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse with the building of multiple megacities. This has led to widespread air and soil pollution, and this process has led to increases in productivity and wages that have helped China to become the world's second largest economy. The population in 2019 was estimated at 1,433,783,000, so on and so forth. But anyway, a huge population. The Chinese are an immensely gifted and intelligent people, intensely practical and pragmatic, and also artistically creative. However, they have done irreparable harm to the natural world and have neglected the teaching of Taoism. Being intensely responsive to challenges, they may be capable of altering the dangerous path they are on. And I just thought I'd show you the NASA's map of the pollution before and after, just 1 month in January on the left, and in February on the right, how that very intense gold area has melted away miraculously. And I think this is happening all over the world. It is one of the features of this virus that it's making people stop flying, stop driving their cars. In the legendary beginning in China, there was a mother who existed before heaven and earth came into being. Her image was woven into the age-old beliefs of the people and the shamanic traditions that later evolved into Daoism and the I Ching, or Book of Changes. One legend described her as an immense peach tree which grew in the Garden of Paradise and was the support of the whole universe. The fruit of this marvelous and magical tree ripened only after 3,000 years, bestowing immortality on whoever tasted it. The Garden of Paradise belonged to the Queen of the Immortals, whose name was Zhi Wangmu, goddess of eternal life. Other myths describe her as mother or grandmother, the primordial heavenly being, the cosmic womb of all life, and the gateway of heaven and earth. And Taoism grew out of this ancient foundation. Whereas the West imagined the creative ground of being as a transcendent father, Taoism, more subtly and comprehensively than any other spiritual tradition, nurtured the quintessence of the feminine as primordial mother, keeping alive the ancient feeling of relationship with nature as the manifest expression of this mysterious, unseen, maternal ground. So Lao Tzu, the greatest of the Taoist sages, living in the 6th century BC, wrote this: "The Tao is the breath that never dies. It is the mother to all creation. There was something formless yet complete that existed before heaven and earth, without sound, without substance, dependent on nothing, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing. One may think of it as the mother of all things under heaven. Its true name we do not know." Now, the Chinese have always used images to convey the most profound insights of their sages. In a stroke of genius, they created this image of the circle divided in 2 parts, one black, one white, with an element of the black in the white area and an element of the white in the black area. What better illustration of the indissoluble relationship between the male and female energies that are the creative ground of all life? Neither is supreme. Each is dependent on and in relationship with the other. From the source which is everything and no thing, and whose image is the circle, came heaven and earth, yang and yin, the male and female principles whose dynamic interaction brings into being the world we see and maintains it in balance. The Tao is both the source and the creative process of life that flows from it, imagined as a mother who is the root of heaven and earth, beyond all, yet within all, giving birth to all, containing all, nurturing all. This is how Lao Tzu described the Tao. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. Taoism did not originate with Lao Tzu, but long before him. The origins of Taoism come from the shamanic practices and oral traditions which were developed as long ago as the Neolithic era. Its earliest written expression is the Book of Changes, the I Ching or Yi Jing, a book of divination consisting of 64 hexagrams, thought to date approximately to the 9th century BC, but drawing on much earlier shamanic traditions and practices dating back to the Shang dynasty and earlier. The shamanic tradition of Taoism was transmitted from master to pupil by a succession of shaman sages, many of whom were sublime artists and poets. In the midst of the turmoil of the dynastic struggles that engulfed China for many centuries, they withdrew into the mountains of China, where they could stay connected with the Tao, deeply in touch with nature. Now we come to Taoist cosmology, and as with Hindu cosmology, there is no duality. The all is ultimately one. It is emanationist. The one emanates from or unfolds to become two, then three, and then the many. Everything in nature is in a constant state of flux and change, as the Buddha himself realized. And movement is the fundamental nature of the universe. Nothing is static or still. The stages of emanation or unfolding are, first of all, the Tao emerging from the nameless source. Next, the Yang Yin, heaven and earth pair. And lastly, the 10,000 things, what the Taoists call the 10,000 things, which is everything to do with the manifest world and our involvement in it. The Tao has an order or a pattern which cannot be defined, but can be recognized with careful observation. The Chinese sages call this invisible order Li, comparing it to the subtle patterns in jade, or the grain in wood, or to the moving patterns in water and the forms of trees and clouds. It's like the DNA of the universe. Tao is the flowing dynamic of nature and the universe, and Li is its intrinsic principle of order, which we can best understand as organic pattern, and water is its most eloquent metaphor. This diagram or image is called the Bagua, the 8 symbols or trigrams of Taoist cosmology, which represent the fundamental principles of reality. The 64 hexagrams of the I Ching look like a representation of computer programming, and apparently the basis of modern computing is derived from this system. Those of you who have consulted the I Ching will know more about this, but there's no time, unfortunately, to explain it. Now, the symbol for Yang is a straight line in the I Ching, and the symbol for Yin is a broken line. And there are 2 basic principles: the male principle, which is represented by heaven and the creative, by day, by sun, by dry, and by hot. And the female principle, which is represented by the earth, by the receptive, by night, the moon, the moist, and the cool. There are many other categories that can be added to those, but those are sort of basic ones. The art of living, as the Taoists saw it, is keeping the 2 in balance, not seeing one as more valuable or important than the other, because Yang cannot exist without Yin, and vice versa. The complementary energies of Yin and Yang woven into the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching are to be understood as 2 interrelated expressions of the one indivisible life energy, heaven and earth, male and female. Each contains elements of the other, and neither can exist without the other. In their indissoluble relationship, there is dialogue, continual movement, and creative change. Polarity is intrinsic to this cosmology, just as an electric current has positive and negative poles, yet are two different aspects of the same system. The I Ching describes the flow of the archetypal energies of the Tao that are both within and around us in relation to a specific time or place or situation. It helps the person who consults its wisdom to balance the energies of yin and yang and to respond to the deeper presence of the one that is both. The art of living in tune with the Tao is keeping the two in balance, not seeing one as more valuable or important than the other, because yang cannot exist without yin and vice versa. And this is the way nature works. There is no good, evil, masculine, feminine, spirit, nature, mind-body dichotomy, as there is in the West. This was written by a great sage called Zhengzhu. The passionate union of yin and yang and the copulation of husband and wife is the eternal pattern of the universe. If heaven and earth did not mingle, whence would everything receive life? Now, Taoism is based on the 5-element system of energetics as seen in nature and the human body. The body shares this system because the body is part of nature. Taoist thought is therefore the basis of all Chinese healing therapies, like Tai Chi, Qigong, and Neigong. Neigong is the esoteric internal alchemical practices or meditations which utilize Jing, sexual and reproductive energies, in the lower body, Qi, functional energy, in the middle body, and Shen, spiritual energies, in the upper body, the head, the third eye, which together lead to longevity, health, and higher consciousness or awakening. These are referred to as the 3 treasures. Their ultimate purpose is a return to the source of the Tao. In a sense, nature is heaven. Humankind stands between heaven and earth, and we can energetically connect to both through inner alchemy practices. Like Einstein and quantum physicists today, the Taoist sages realized long ago through inner alchemy practices that everything in the universe is ultimately energy, or what they called Qi. Different physical forms are manifestations of different frequencies of vibration in this field of energy. These frequencies range from the most subtle forms, which cannot be perceived by the senses, to denser forms manifested as emotional states, and ultimately to the forms of visible, tangible matter. They discovered through meditative techniques honed over centuries the many subtle aspects of the spectrum of frequencies that never manifest in physical form. They discovered that this energy or life force could be controlled by the mind. The Yi, the mind, influences the Qi, energy. This is the energy that was used in Neigong, inner alchemy, for longevity, health, and spiritual awareness, and also in the martial arts and healing practices. I've got this diagram, which I'm not going to go into because it's so complicated, but it's absolutely fascinating, and it shows the precision of the Chinese mind, how they worked out all the different aspects of what energies were connected with what physical parts of the body. Anyway, you can study it in your own time. And here is a diagram of acupuncture, the yang meridians and the yin meridians. And I imagine quite a few of you will have had acupuncture and have known its amazing benefits. And here is a beautiful Chinese diagram of the body, basically, but also the hidden energies behind the physical form of the body. I can't explain it because I don't understand everything about it, but it is incredibly beautiful. Now I come briefly back to politics again and the period of the warring states, which lasted from 800 to 221 BC. So there were 600 years of uncertainty and wars, of slaughter and starvation among the people. But there was also a more rationalistic and humanistic interpretation of life that was beginning to emerge. And this was the general unstable political and social background to the teaching of Lao Tzu and Confucius, who were near contemporaries. So the situation in the 6th century BC was about the disintegration of the old traditions, the birth of critical reason, traditional religious beliefs were questioned, the awakening of individuality over social customs and conventional norms. Much was happening similar to what was happening in India at the same time, in that century, the 6th century, when the time when the Buddha lived. So it was self-interest against, or not particularly against, but in contrast to the common good. And we can see these same situations and problems arising in our own culture today. So two great sages emerged during the 6th century BC, the same century in which the Buddha was teaching in India. We have Lao Tzu on the left, and on the right, Confucius. And in the center, Zhuangzi, who lived later on in the 4th century. So Lao Tzu was teaching the path of inner realization, and Confucius was teaching the path of social harmony. They complemented each other. I don't think they ever met each other. Now we know that Lao Tzu had a miraculous birth, apparently, that he was a record keeper at a minor court in China, that he left civilization for solitude late in life, that he left only a hastily drafted summary of his teaching that has survived, and the year and place of his death is unknown. The elusive essence of Daoism is expressed in the Tao Te Ching, the only known work of the great sage Lao Tzu, who legend says was persuaded to write down the 81 sayings by a man called Quan Yin, the master of the past. When reaching the end of his life, he had embarked on his last journey to the mountains of the West. The word Tao means the fathomless source, the one, the deep. Day is the way the Tao comes into being, growing organically like a plant from the deep ground or source of life, from within outwards. Jing is the slow, patient shaping of that process through the activity of a creative intelligence within nature that is expressed as the organic patterning within all life, a kind of cosmic DNA. The Tao does nothing, and yet nothing is left undone. And here is a huge sculpture of Lao Tzu in the Jingwan mountain in the province of Guangzhou. The Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu's profound guide to life, has a sacred status in China. Above all, Taoism is the precious treasure of the people of China, who throughout the dynastic upheavals that have afflicted it, retained their trust in it. And it's been translated more frequently than any other book in the world except the Bible, which I didn't know. It's fascinating. Our relationship with nature is the key to Taoism. The inner attunement to oneness with the Tao leads to right action in the world. This is one of the most important features of Taoism, this inner attunement to oneness with the Tao. And this is what Lao Tzu wrote. The valley spirit never dies. It is named the mysterious female. And the doorway of the mysterious female is the base from which heaven and earth sprang. It is there within us all the while. Draw upon it as you will. It never runs dry. Throughout this talk, I'm showing you the most beautiful paintings, which I think you can feel the emanation of wisdom coming from them. The essence of this teaching is, like the Buddha's, the training of the ordinary mind, represented here by the ox. The whole sequence of pictures showing the sage riding an ox is called Riding the Ox Home. There are many, many copies of this story, Riding the Ox Home. So Lao Tzu said, I have but three things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These three are your greatest treasures. Simple in actions and in thoughts, you return to the source of being. Patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Compassionate towards yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world. It's so clear, so wonderful teaching. Now, inward realization of oneness with the Tao yields selflessness, effortlessness, spontaneity, and complete attunement with the moment. I think it's striking how similar Lao Tzu's teaching is to the teaching of the Buddha, who lived at approximately the same time. To be of heaven is to be in Tao. Tao is forever, and he that possesses it, though his body ceases, is not destroyed. Such a beautiful painting, that. The soul of China is to be found in the paintings of its mysterious landscape and in the writings of its greatest sages and poets. Taoism is their creation. The most significant characteristic of the Taoist sages is their profound respect for and relationship with nature. And this comes through in all their writings. It's just inescapable and marvelous and unique. Taoism seeks relationship with nature, not domination of it. Those who would take over the earth and shape it to their will never, I notice, succeed. The earth is like a vessel so sacred that at the mere approach of the profane, it is marred, and when they reach out their fingers, it is gone. Now, the philosophy of Taoism was really to let go of the need for striving and control, to rest in the quietness of mind and humility of heart that the Taoist sage embodies. It is to live in a state of instinctive spontaneity that they named Zujan, a being in the moment that can only exist as in earliest childhood, when the effort to adapt to collective values and social customs is unknown or of no importance. What exists is what is. There is no need to change it by imposing one's will or trying to manipulate circumstances. Change will come about by changing the quality of one's being, by consciously reconnecting moment by moment with the presence of the Tao, particularly in times of confusion or stress. And the vision is to feel what needs to be said without striving to say it, to speak from the heart in as few words as possible, to act when action is required, responding to the needs of the moment without attachment to the fruits of action. This was the essence of the Taoist vision. It is a response to life that is essentially gentle, balanced, dynamic, and wise. It is utterly unrelated to the pursuit of goals, power, fame, or success. It is still reflected today in the faces and demeanor of modern sages who live in the sacred mountains of China, where for centuries retreats have been built as places of contemplation in a landscape of utter stillness and breathtaking beauty. The wide pond expands like a mirror. The heavenly light and cloud shadows play upon it. How does such clarity occur? It is because it contains the living stream from the fountain. The Taoists spent years studying the shape of mountains and rocks and trees and bamboos before they felt ready to put brush and pen and ink to paper. The distinction between the artist and the subject he was painting dissolved in an intuitive sense of communion between them. You gradually become aware that they are not observing nature as something separate from themselves, but as something they know they are part of. They observed what was happening around them and the interaction of man with nature. This scene would have been the same hundreds of years ago, if not thousands. And the way the mist arose in mountains and valleys. They paid the closest attention to the movement of water because it reflected the subtle and ever-changing pattern of Li. And this is what Lao Tzu wrote about water. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. The soft overcomes the hard, the gentle overcomes the rigid. Everyone knows this is true, but few can put it into practice. Now, the soul of China and the profound depth of Taoist thought is found in the paintings of its mysterious landscape. This painting of a Taoist retreat in the mountains is typical of the marvelous paintings created by the Taoist sages. If you look at that painting, you can see the waterfall in the distance and two buildings, one a temple in the middle, and then the dwelling place down at the bottom. Every detail is minutely observed. I'm sorry, I have to go back a bit. A 1,000 years after the time of Lao Tzu, in the time of the Tang and Song dynasties, the greatest Taoist paintings were created. The sages of the Taoist tradition never lost the shamanic understanding that relationship with nature was the key to staying in touch with the source of life. They never followed ascetic practices which sacrificed the body for the sake of spiritual advancement. Of all the spiritual traditions, the Taoists did not split nature from its invisible ground, so losing touch with the soul. They never became lost in the maze of the intellect and its metaphysical constructions, but through patience and devotion were able to realize the difficult alchemy of bringing themselves into harmony with the deeper harmony of nature. They did not lose sight of the one. Whenever I look at one of the great Taoist paintings of the Tang or Song dynasties, or read a Taoist poem, I find myself subtly permeated by them. They evoke a state of calm, helping me to let go of the things that normally distract the mind, the preoccupation with the 10,000 things that the Taoists call dust. They relate me instantaneously to the source or ground which unites everything. So this is what a poet called Liu Yiming wrote. when the inward and the outward are illumined and all is clear. You are one with the light of the moon and the sun. When developed to its ultimate state, this is a round luminosity which nothing can deceive, the subtle body of a unified spirit pervading the whole universe. Then you have the same function as the sun and the moon. In 1957, I was fortunate enough to have been shown the fabulous treasures that had been taken from Beijing to Taiwan by Chiang Kai-shek in 1949 and stored in a huge underground chamber there. These treasures were half of the imperial treasure that now is in Beijing. Among them, hanging on the walls, were paintings like this one, whose incredible beauty made me burst into tears. I also had as a godfather an unusual Frenchman who had chosen to live for decades in China, and I was able to spend many hours with him when I returned from my journeys to the East. He lived in the hills behind Monaco, where he grew his own vegetables and strawberries. In his old age, he even looked like a Chinese sage, and he taught me about Daoism, reverently showing me the precious manuscripts and paintings that he had brought back with him from his years in China. He told me never to forget the wisdom of the Taoist sages, explaining that they had discovered how to develop the mind without losing touch with the soul. And this is why an understanding of their philosophy, China's greatest gift to humanity, was so important. In particular, he mentioned the genius of a poet of the Tang dynasty called Wang Wei. Who lived in the 8th century BC. And here is a short verse from one of Wang Wei's poems. In the deep forest, I sit alone. Loudly I sing and tune my lute. The forest is so thick that no one knows about it. Only the bright moon comes to shine upon me. This painting shows a sage receiving a visit from the immortals. Enlightenment, according to Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, two of Taoism's greatest sages, uncovers unknown powers of the mind which lie behind the threshold of normal consciousness. Sudden enlightenment breaks through the habitual structure of consciousness and opens the mind to the powers and insight that are latent in the depths of the soul. The wide pond expands like a mirror. The heavenly light and dark clouds play upon it. How does such clarity occur? It is because it contains the living stream from the fountain. Now, the Taoists call the art of going with the flow of the Tao Wu Wei, not doing. Wu means not or non, and Wei means doing, making, striving after goals, struggling to control events. They understood Wu Wei as the art of relinquishing control, not trying to force or manipulate life, but through an act of conscious observation and connection, attuning themselves to the underlying rhythm and ever-changing modes of its being. The Taoists would never have entertained the idea of targets or goals, other than the mastery of the medium, poetry or painting, through which they discovered and expressed their relationship with the Tao. So they said, do you have the patience to wait till your mind settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The stilling of the surface mind that is preoccupied with the 10,000 things brings into being a deeper, more complete mind at a meditative state of consciousness and creative power that the Taoists named Day, which enabled them not to interfere with life, but in their words, to enter the forest without moving the grass, to enter the water without raising a ripple. The mind of man searches outward all day, The further it reaches, the more it opposes itself. Only those who look inward can censor their passions and cease their thoughts. Being able to cease their thoughts, their minds become tranquil. To tranquilize the mind is to nourish one's spirit, and to nourish the spirit is to return to nature. The way of the Tao is to reconnect with the mother source or ground, to be in it like a bird in the air or a fish in the sea, in touch with it while living in the midst of the myriad forms that the source takes as it becomes manifest in the 10,000 things. It is to become aware of the presence of the Tao in everything, to discover and observe its rhythm and its dance, learning to trust it, not interfering with the flow of life by manipulating or directing or resisting or controlling. It is to develop a relationship with and an intuitive awareness of a mystery that gradually reveals itself. And this is again from Wang Wei. Since the days of my middle life, I was deeply devoted to Tao. Oftentimes with joy in my heart, alone I roam here and there. It is a wonderful thing that I am aware of myself. When the streamlet ends my trip, I settle down and catch the moment of rising mists. Now and then I meet a fur dweller of the woods. We chat and laugh. Never do I want to go home. Following the way of Tao requires a turning towards the hidden withinness of things, a receptivity to the unseen through contemplation of the seen in relationship with the unseen. Enough time to reflect on what is inconceivable and indescribable, beyond the reach of mind or intellect, that can only be felt, intuitive, experienced at ever deeper depth. Action taken from this position of balance and freedom will be aligned to the harmony of the Tao and will therefore embody its mysterious power and wisdom, enabling one to act in the world without attachment to action. The Tao is priceless, a pearl containing creation. In storage, it is utterly dark without a trace. Brought out, its light shines through day and night. Becoming wise depends entirely on this. You need nothing else to be enlightened. The Taoists never separated nature from spirit, consciously preserving the instinctive knowledge that although it manifests as a duality, all life is one. No people observe nature more passionately and minutely than these Chinese sages, or reach so deeply into the hidden heart of life, describing the life and form of insects, animals, birds, flowers, trees, wind, water, planets, and stars. They felt the continuous flow and flux of life as an underlying energy that was without beginning or end, that was, like water, never static, never still, never fixed in separate things or events, but always in a state of movement, a state of changing and becoming. No people has understood the indivisibility of spirit and nature better than these Taoist sages of China. None has penetrated more deeply into the soul of nature and understood and respected the indissoluble relationship between body, soul, and spirit. Taoism is one of the few surviving cultural legacies which point to the deep intelligence and wisdom of ancient lunar culture, the culture that I spoke of in my webinars last March. The Chinese sages lived their life in seclusion and solitude in remote mountain hermitages, often situated high above the ground and surrounded by forests and lakes. Observation and contemplation over thousands of years brought them the insight that the body exists within the wider matrix of nature, and nature within the wider soul or ground of the cosmos that they call the Tao. They understood that the boundless energy of the universe that they called Qi flows through everything that exists, and through the flow of that energy, everything is connected to everything else. Their insight might be summed up in the words of a modern teacher of Qigong: I am within the universe, and the universe is within me. They cherished the Tao with their brushstrokes, observing how it flowed into patterns of cloud and mist between earth and mountain peak, or the changing rhythm of air currents and the eddying water of rivers and streams, the exquisite opening of plum blossom in spring, the rustling dance of bamboo and willow. They listened to the sounds that can only be heard in silence. They expressed their experience of the Tao in their paintings, in their poetry, and in their way of living, which was essentially one of withdrawal from the world to a sanctuary in the heart of nature, where they could live a simple contemplative life, concentrating on perfecting their brushstrokes in calligraphy and painting, and their subtlety of expression in the art of poetry. Humility, reverence, patience, insight, and wisdom were the qualities that they sought to cultivate. In a treatise on painting, Chuang Huai writes, only he who reaches reality can follow nature's spontaneity and be aware of the subtlety of things, and his mind will be absorbed by them. His brush will secretly be in harmony with movement and quiescence, and all forms will issue forth out of that harmony. Appearances and substance are caught in one motion as the life breath reverberates through them. He who is ignorant of reality becomes a slave of passion, and his nature will be distorted by externalities. He sinks into confusion and is disturbed by thoughts of gain or loss. How can he speak of genuine works of heaven and earth? Out of non-being, being is born. Out of silence, the writer produces a song. The Taoist artist or poet intuitively reached into the secret essence of what he was observing, making himself one with it, then inviting it to speak through him, so releasing the dynamic harmony within it. He imposed nothing of himself on it, but reflected the soul of what he was observing through the highly developed skills he had cultivated over a lifetime of practice. Through the perfection of his art, he did not define or explain the Tao, which, as the great Taoist sage Lao Tzu said, cannot be conveyed either by words or by silence, but called into being, so that it could be experienced by the beholder. The Tao flows through the whole work as presence, at once transcendent in its mystery and immanent in its form. The distillation of what the Taoist sages discovered is bequeathed to us in the beauty and wisdom of their painting, their poetry, and their philosophy, and in their profound understanding of the relationship between the observer and what is observed, and the eternal ground or unified field that underlies and unfolds them both. So non-violence was intrinsic to this philosophy, and one may compare Hinduism and Buddhism with Daoism for this. Good weapons are instruments of fear. All creatures hate them. Therefore, followers of Tao never use them. Weapons are instruments of fear. They are not a wise man's tools. He uses them only when he has no choice. Peace and quiet are dear to his heart, and victory no cause for rejoicing. If you rejoice in victory, then you delight in killing. If you delight in killing, you cannot fulfill yourself. When many people are being killed, they should be mourned in heartfelt sorrow. That is why a victory must be observed like a funeral. So the Taoist path was essentially about meditation, contemplation, and enlightenment. and the creation of the golden flower and the diamond body. The diamond body which develops inside the golden flower is the summation of Taoist alchemy. The Taoist said, "Whoever attains to this pinnacle of achievement returns to the beauty of nature." Now, some of you may know this book, The Secret of the Golden Flower, which grew out of an oral tradition dated to the Tang dynasty in the 8th century AD, that was focused on the image of the golden elixir of life. For a long time, it was transmitted orally until it was first printed in the 18th century, and 1,000 copies of it were printed in Beijing in 1920, apparently. Its founder was said to be Lu Yin, born in 755 AD, whom later legend described as one of the 8 immortals. This book gives the best available account of the beliefs and practices pertaining to the golden elixir of life, although some parts may be missing. It seems to be a blend of Buddhist and Taoist ideas, and Jung wrote an extensive commentary on it. It's well worth reading if you can find a copy of it. Now I come back to my famous Silk Road, which shows the relationship between the West and China, and how people traveled that road incredibly for many, many centuries. 1,000 years after the life of the Buddha, his teachings reached China via the Silk Road. There is a Chinese Buddhist text called the Avatamsaka Sutra, or Flower Ornament Scripture. It is the creation of Huayan Buddhism, regarded by Chinese and Japanese scholars as the highest form of Buddhism. Legend says that the teaching given within it was spoken by the Buddha when he was in the state of samadhi at the time of his enlightenment. It's 1,000 pages long. It's absolutely incredible to read. It's just the fruit of very, very deep contemplation over many centuries. Translated by Thomas Cleary. Tremendous commitment to translating that book. So this extraordinary text, the quintessence of centuries of Buddhist contemplation and meditation, was originally written in Sanskrit, then translated into Chinese between the 6th and 8th centuries AD. And there it formed the basis of a Chinese Buddhist school called the Flower Ornament School, combining elements of Buddhism and Daoism. The great Buddhist scholar D.T. Suzuki considered it to be the consummation of Buddhist thought, Buddhist sentiment, and Buddhist experience. And he wrote, "No religious literature in the world can ever approach the grandeur of conception, the depth of feeling, and the gigantic scale of composition as attained by this sutra." Legend says that the teaching given within it was spoken by the Buddha when he experienced a state of samadhi or cosmic consciousness during the night of his awakening. He might well have remembered it or spoken it to somebody, perhaps to Ananda, his favorite disciple. I don't know. Now, this is one of the most magnificent images of Quan Yin ever to have been created by a sculptor or an artist. I don't know where it is. I haven't been able to find out. Via the Silk Road, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara blended with the Tibetan goddess Tara and gradually moved into China. The Chinese name Quan Yin, or Guanyin, was a translation of the Sanskrit word Avalokiteshvara. Both mean the one who hears the cries of the world. At first, this compassionate being was imagined in male form, but from the 5th century AD, the female form of Quan Yin began to appear in China, and by the 10th century, it predominated. It was in the far northwest, at the interface between Chinese, Tibetan, and European civilizations, that the cult of Quan Yin took strongest root, and it was from here that it spread throughout China and into Korea and Japan, grafted onto the far older image of the mother goddess, and also the Tibetan goddess Tara. Every province had its local image and its own story or legend about her. Taoist and Buddhist elements were fused, creating an image of her that was deeply satisfying to the people. By the 16th century, Quan Yin had become the principal deity of China and is so today, beneath the surface of a secular culture. And this is another more modern, but it's not modern because it's not a contemporary picture, but here's Quan Yin riding a red dragon. And I wanted to show this because it's a wonderful image of Yin and Yang working together, with her compassion pouring from her into the dragon's mouth, forming a figure of 8 through her body and his. The red dragon in China is a symbol of benign but extraordinary power. And Quan Yin also has benign and extraordinary power to heal. What has come out of China in the form of this virus is also bringing about huge global changes. The abrupt halt to consumerism, the huge reduction in flying, resulting in vanishing areas of pollution, more care for the old and for our close neighbors. Love is emerging, awareness of what is most important in life. So the dragon is bringing us the energy of the deep feminine that the planet and all of us so greatly need. And Quan Yin is bringing the blessing of healing. So that's the end really now. I've got one other marvelous image, which I'll just end with, but no comment on it. It just shows the superb artistry of the Chinese sculptor and also the painter. And I've left out the story of the rainmaker, but it's in my book. It's a lovely story, which I think you'd probably like to read. It's in the section on Daoism in my book. So there we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anne. It's another wonderful presentation, and the images and the quotations are just beautiful, exquisite, absolutely exquisite. But at this stage, I don't have a question. However, I would like to add something to your outstanding lecture. As part of Ubiquity's Great Book series, a few years ago, I gave 2 lectures on Taoist cosmology and healing, and I lifted a small segment from my presentation, which I believe would add another aspect to today's Taoist lecture, and here it goes. For Taoists, the human self is not the kind of pure consciousness that some Buddhist schools suggest, not merely a moral agent as Confucians would like to think. Rather, it is a unity of physical body, mental function, and spiritual entity. Both Taoists and Confucians contend it is vital for the human self to be in harmony with the cosmos, and therefore call for each individual to follow the Tao, the way of heaven and earth. However, their approaches and the methods they employ to reach this goal differ substantially. Confucians propagate a kind of social ethic, but Taoists a sort of cosmic ethic. For most Confucians, following Tao means to achieve harmony with the universe through one's endeavor to manifest cosmic virtue in daily activities, in family life, in a conscientious engagement in bringing peace to the world. For the majority of Taoists, however, following Tao means to aspire to a perfect unity of physical and mental dimensions through spiritual meditation and bodily practices, and harmonizing yin and yang both in one's relation to the cosmos and within the microcosm of one's own self. It is from this approach to cosmic harmony that the Taoists derive their theories and practices of sex. The sexual union of men and women mirror yin and yang on the cosmic level. Their distinctive individual attitudes to life, harmonized through Taoist sexual practice, help create harmony on earth. For the Taoists, whether alone or with partners, the physical aspects of sexuality were always to embrace as part of the route to optimal health, spiritual growth, and development. I based my lecture then on this wonderful book, I don't know if you can actually see it. This is The Art of the Bedchamber, Chinese Sexual Yoga Classics, including women's solo meditation text. And this is by Douglas Weil, who actually edited and put together this wonderful book. This is, it's absolute wonderful material. If you want to dig in more into how Taoists dealt with longevity and sexual practices, and let me share just a brief comment by him. And this is what he said: the sexual union of man and woman is the Tao of yin and yang. Sex is yin and yang in action. Yin and yang are sex writ large. The sexual adept could no more enter the bedchamber free of centuries of cosmological baggage than could the connoisseur of art behold the painting in a vacuum. The followers of sexual school of Daoism encouraged the development of sexual sensibility, then invested every action of cohesion, indeed every organ, posture, and sensation with an indelible metaphysical significance. Man and women are heaven and earth. Heart and genitals are fire and water. Sexual arousal is the rising sun. Cosmic configurations and celestial movements are reflected in the sex act. What is above acts and what is below follows. This is the way of all things. The individual's role is not larger than life, but one could not forget that it was certainly part of the larger life of the universe. So just wanted to add a little bit of extra to the Taoist cosmology, and this book is absolutely amazing, apart from all the other books that you mentioned. So I'd like to, would you like to comment anything, Anne, on this?
I think that's a lovely, not an addition really, but it's a complement to what I've been saying, because it brings it down to earth, to the relationship between man and woman, and to the importance of sexuality, of understanding what sexuality is, and how important it is that it's approached with reverence and there's something sacred. So thank you very much. That's very important. I didn't know about that book. Lovely.
Oh, it's wonderful. Well, actually, these two lectures are on our YouTube channel in case you don't want to get the book or read the book. But it is absolutely fascinating that, as you mentioned, that how the Taoist for health and healing and harmonizing between the body and the heaven, they put together this amazing system of when to and how to make love. And it was really all about health and healing. It's not about just like orgasm and ejaculation, were two different concepts for the Taoist. But let's turn to our audience and see if there are any questions. Paolo, let's hear from Paolo.
Where's Paolo?
Just a second, I guess. He's almost there.
There he is.
Hi, Paolo. Paolo, you're still muted. Just unmute, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear
Excellent.
you.
Yeah, so thanks again for this wonderful lecture, Anne. Very, very fascinating. I'm more familiar with Buddhism and Hinduism, less with Taoism, so very, very hit by what you just shared with us. I have one comment and one question. One comment has to do with the ultimate purpose of Taoism. So whereas other traditions seem to be pointing to enlightenment as the ultimate goal of our journey here, it seems to me that here is more about seeking balance. So balance seems to play a bigger central role. And so I wonder, and with balance being, if you basically seek balance, then as a consequence, you will also have enlightenment, but its balance seems to be a central piece. So I'd like to have your views on that one. And secondly is a question. So last time when we spoke about Hinduism and Buddhism, I was interested about what is the soul. So a question I have for you now is, what is the soul in Taoism, and what is the relationship between the soul and the Li, or the Tao, the energy?
I think you must be careful not to pin it down to intellectual concepts.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the thing of balance was very important, the balance between yin and yang. But the deeper emphasis in Taoism is relationship with nature, and enlightenment comes through relationship with nature. As you go deeper and deeper and deeper, using your own work as the medium through which to experience nature, as if you're a painter or a poet or a sculptor, whatever, you entered into the experience of what it is to be alive, really, to be truly alive, and to bring whatever you're doing into life before you, so to speak, working with nature to create that thing, whatever it was. So that would be, I think the balance necessarily leads on to the relationship with nature as the key to enlightenment. So that's the balance side. And the other one, can you just repeat again, because my memory is not too good?
Yeah, and maybe it's too simplistic as a question, but what is the soul in Taoism and the relation with Li or with the Tao?
Well, the soul is precisely really what I've been saying. The soul is to reach into the soul of nature, which is all around us, and to experience the connection between our soul and the soul of nature, and the deeper soul of the Tao itself, which is the deepest cosmic ground of everything, if you like. And the Li is the patterning, and this is what they observed. What is happening with the unfolding of the leaf? What is happening with the growth of the wood? What is happening with the movement of the water as I observe it? How is it changing all the time? So they saw certain patterns are fixed, like possibly the tree, but water is continually moving. So they observed all these different aspects of nature and really developed their own understanding through observation. And the soul, they didn't specifically mention the soul, but it was implicit in everything they did. It's there in the beauty of the painting and in the quality of the observation, the minuteness of detail. It's entering into the spirit of life, which is unfolding before their eyes.
So there's a relationship between individual and I think I'm caught up with the discussion we had around Atman and around the juxtaposition between individual soul and universal soul.
Universal soul. Well, yeah. I don't know that they probably did have a word for, yes, they did. If you go back to Negong, that read the passage
exactly.
Negong, it's in there. I can't remember it offhand, but it's there. There are different levels of soul. The physical level, the emotional level, and the cosmic level.
The three jewels, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Paolo. We have Margot as well. Hi, Margot.
Hi.
Margot.
Thank you for the beautiful lecture. I tried to just listen to it and soak it in and found it bringing me more into a sense of flow and presence, and I'll come back and deal with the concepts later. So that was really enjoyable, a great way to start my day. Here's my question, where I have an easy time understanding how Hinduism applies to the various stratum of society, you know, from the Brahmins all the way down the layers of society to the workers and everything. And Buddhism, less so, but still, Daoism seems like a purely ascetic ideology or practice. And I'm wondering how it applies to the common man and the people who have to, you know, make society function, the workers and things like that.
That's an interesting question, but I think that it's because Taoism is really the philosophy of the people, it's deep in the people's soul. It may not be articulated in everyday life, but it's there, so to speak, and it always has been there for thousands of years, and it arose out of the life of the people. But the Taoist sages withdrew from life. They withdrew from the sort of the hustle and bustle of everyday life deliberately because they wanted to contemplate. But it doesn't mean to say they were rejecting the people. On the contrary, what they were doing would have nourished the people, if you see what I mean, on an inner level, which is what we're discovering with quantum physics, that everything is connected. So they knew the importance of what they were doing. They were helping nature, but also helping the whole people of China. And it may be that we don't know the end of where this story of China is going to take us, but it's fascinating. I just tell you one lovely story about a Taoist story about a farmer who had a horse, and one day the horse ran away, and the neighbor came to him and said, "Oh dear, what a terrible disaster! Your horse has run away." And the farmer said, "Wait." Next day, the horse returned with 6 other horses, and the neighbor said, "Oh, wonderful! You've got good fortune. Now you've got 6." And the man said, "Wait." And then the farmer's son got on one of the horses and was thrown from it and broke his leg. And the neighbor said, "Oh dear, another disaster. What are you going to do?" And the man said, "Wait." And the next day, the army came by wanting to conscript young men. And of course, the young man who broke his leg couldn't be conscripted. So the story goes on. So each disaster will have its compensating good side, so to speak. You never know in life. That's why I say the virus has another side to it. It seems a catastrophe, but what is coming out of it will be absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you.
Actually, on that note, there is a question from one of our participants, from Amy Blumenschein. Interesting to think how Daoism might affect the Chinese understanding of the pandemic. What's your thought on this?
I think that they have an extraordinary sort of mixture of conformity and rebellion, the Chinese, because we saw in the Tiananmen Square rebellion what the Chinese soul is capable of when it wants to throw off repressive authority. But on the other hand, it has to accept it, as when everybody had to be consigned to their houses in Wuhan, and they accepted that. So it's a sort of, I don't know what will come out of it, and I don't know how they see it, because we don't hear from what the Chinese are saying, what they're thinking. But I think that they would really regard it like that story that I've told you, that a catastrophe has happened. We have to obey what the government says because it's going to help us survive. But after that, perhaps good things will come out that we had no idea of would emerge, like care for our neighbor, which we may not have bothered about before because we were so busy consuming and getting things and doing things. We had no time to think about neighbors. So we don't know yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully it's not just our governments we're going to follow, but we're going to follow our own initiative as well in terms of co-creating the future. Another question, Anne, from Amy. I'm struck by the contrast of flowing patterns of the East with geometric angles of the West.
I think that you're right, Amy, because what happened with the Renaissance, we had perspective for the first time. This is something that doesn't come in very much into Chinese art, whereas the West is built on the concept of linear perspective. And there was a man, I can't remember his name, but he was well known at that time. I think Veronica's husband knows all about him, has written about him, but I can't remember his name. But from that came really science. We've developed, although China was very advanced in scientific terms, more so than the West for many centuries. But the West, from the time of the Renaissance and then the scientific enlightenment, so to speak, has focused entirely on the material world, has neglected the inner world altogether, neglected the world of the soul. Whereas I think the Chinese has kept in touch somehow because of its long training in Taoist thinking. But we are very much into mathematics in the West, but equally the Chinese were into mathematics. So I really can't say, I don't know enough, can't say definitely.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question. How did women participate in Taoist practice?
I don't think they did. Because I think according to Jim, when I said that maybe Taoism is a good idea, generally, he said, well, they didn't treat women well. And of course, the Confucian ideal of keeping women in the home and binding their feet and all that kind of thing didn't treat women well at all. I don't think until the present time, women have not been acknowledged of any importance whatsoever.
But there was Actually, sorry to interrupt you, but there was a time, and this is the book I was referring to. This book actually talks about it. There was a time when women were respected and cared for and loved, and they almost, maybe not as much, but they had almost the equal.
That's lovely to hear, but I haven't gone into that. But that book obviously is a missing key to answering the question.
Yeah. Okay, then we have another question from Vivian. Can you talk more about the basis of computer programming and Daoism?
No.
Okay, that's a short answer.
I just read that, I think, in Alan Watts's book or somebody's book.
All right.
Interesting comment, but I don't know nothing about computing, and B, nothing about how it might be connected with the I Ching. But it makes it, because of the patterning of it, it's something to do with the arrangement of the patterning.
Then there is Carrie asking me about the YouTube reference. If you actually, if you go to the YouTube and just type in Ubiquity University Wisdom School, and we have all the great books and other community core lectures.
Have a look. I searched for it. It's a blast from the past, I think. Have a look at that link. I think that's the one.
Oh,
hello everyone. I'm Jim Garris.
Oh, it's yes. So it's, oh gosh, that was 4 years ago. Yes, probably that's the one.
The book is on there. That's the book that you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. Would you mind to share the link, Gaur, with?
Yes, I'm sharing it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can't believe it was 4 years ago. Time flies. Now we still have. Oh, Jim Garrison. Hello.
Jim.
He put his hand up.
Jim coming up. It's slow today, but it should arrive any second.
Hi, Jim.
Here we go.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Anne. A beautiful lecture. I think this was your best. And I just wanted to make a quick comment for your comment, and to say to Paulo's question and Margot's question, I think the thing that distinguished Taoism, as you've pointed out, in contradistinction to Buddhism and Hinduism, which were based on a reincarnational release from existence and suffering. There was an immediacy to Taoism, a this worldliness to Taoism, a sense that the universe is good, we are in a beautiful world, and there's nothing to reincarnate out of. There's no notion of negation of creation or earth in Taoism. And therefore, to your question, Margot, about being for the people or not, the Taoism took hold in China and was adhered to by millions of people, and finally, conflated with Buddhism in many, many ways, precisely because it gave people a way of being in the world. And the story that Anne told of the farmer and the horse and the sun and the conscription really exemplifies a orientation into the world or about the world that allows one to live in the world without guilt and without a sense that there's something other, higher, after I die. The enlightenment is actually how you are in relationship to the Tao that constitutes your sense of well-being. And that's what I find so profound about Taoism, is it was the only one of the axial religions that actually embraced creation. and embraced life and wasn't predicated on some notion that you've got to go somewhere else for moksha. The closest analog in the West is actually Judaism, which, and the Greeks in particular, which were very immediate in their sense of cosmology. And I just like to make a quick comment, Anne, about what Georgie said about women. Taoism was the only religion to date that hasn't repressed and negated and denigrated sexuality. So that's like an amazing exception. So if you negate nature, you negate women in a patriarchal order, which is prevailing in the West and prevailing in Asia, and you say sexuality is good, creation is good, then even though you're in the grip of a patriarchal structure, you elevate women, because in the Taoist sexual manuals, it was the woman who led. It was not the man that kind of seduced the woman as chattel, as property. It was much more of a notion that the women were the kind of the carriers, the masters of the body and sexuality, because of their cycles, their menstrual cycles, their ability to give birth. And so the men in the Taoist tradition honored the women in a way that to my knowledge doesn't exist in any of the other major religions. So there was this, I think, creative tension in Taoism between a patriarchal frame that embraced all agricultural societies without exception, and a philosophy of well-being in a created order that is good, within a sexuality that is to be affirmed, all within this notion that the more you align yourself with these natural patterns and cycles, the more you experience the Tao. And so anyway, I just wanted to emphasize these aspects of Taoism, which makes it, in my mind, of all the axial religions, in some ways the most sublime. We need, if we're going to survive, we need to learn a lot more about Taoism, because particularly with the coronavirus, I think the Taoists would say we're experiencing this plague because we are not in alignment with the Tao. And nature is, you know, the empire strikes back. And the great choice from Amy Blumenschein, the earth is saying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Amy, this is brilliant. And now we can't breathe. And in fact, you know, we're going to be announcing in a couple of days a Rebuilding Our World leadership summit that we're convening with 20 or 30 other organizations, about how do we now we're all in this immediacy of the coronavirus. We're under lockdown. But over the next 30 to 45 days, things are going to begin to move. Some countries will go worse, but some will begin to improve. And we'll begin to ask the question that you noted, Anne, what do we now do? How do we use this crisis as an opportunity for human renewal? How do we rebuild our world in a more conscious, humane, and ecologically, I would say, Taoist frame? So I think this is one of those moments where Taoism has a lot to offer, a lot to teach. And so your lecture, I think, is inordinately important this week. I think we should send it out, Georgie, as something that we all need to contemplate as we look beyond the coronavirus. So Anne, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your comments, because they helped greatly with the last talk as well, with the last webinar, where I'm going to point out the failure really of the other axial religions to love the earth and to love the body and to be in the place where we are instead of trying to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. Why are we trying to go to heaven? Why don't we stop the attachment of being physical beings and children of the earth and physical beings, sexual beings, intellectual beings? We're here in the Garden of Eden, and how the religions came to a position of negation of all this. Our bodies, our women, our earth is an amazing mystery to me. I mean, when you really think about.
I think they came to it, Jim, because they needed to. The religions needed to control the population, and they did it by these methods of deprecating the earth and sin and guilt, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But I found Taoism such a relief to speak about and write about and live. And I had this wonderful godfather who was a Taoist sage and taught me all these things when I was 25.
Beautiful. You were one of the lucky ones. So anyway, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jim, for your comments. I'd like to really go back to this book I suggested to you all read, because this really goes back to a time when the Chinese really practiced Daoism, both women and men, and equally and respectfully. So to me, when I read this book, I was like, oh my gosh, such actually era did exist. So it is really marvelous. It's funny as well. It's ontological, and it's marvelous. It's really marvelous, and it's great to discover that this is part of human history. Now, we only have a couple of minutes. I'd like to make two announcements. One of which is that I talked about last Thursday. We have this free event, the webinar for good. Today, in half an hour, we have our one and only Banafsheh Syed, who will conduct online webinar dancing. So please come and join us. Georg will put the link to register in a second. The second announcement is next Thursday. We in Europe changed the clock this Sunday. So for us, we will start an hour later. I don't know if Margot, you India, whether you changed the clock or not, but just keep an eye on it. Georg did send out an announcement in that regard. I just don't want any of you to miss it. So that's all from us. Thank you again, dear Anne, for a wonderful lecture and your contributions, Paolo, Margot, Jim, and Amy, and Vivienne, and whoever asked the questions. And see you next Thursday. Stay safe. Stay away from coronavirus.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
All the very best. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Anne.